Project Binky in colour. Starring Nick Blackhurst. Also starring Richard Brunning. And Rex Hamilton as Abraham Lincoln.
Tonight's episode, give it some stick. Coming up in episode 11, I wear some glasses. Nick channels his inner Ed China. And one of us gets on with some hoovering. We left the last episode with the wheels finally on the car, and you might have noticed they stick outside the body just a tick. It's not actually as bad as it looks, for various reasons we'll get to later on in the build, but for now, there's an elephant in the room we need to talk about. No, not that elephant, that's George.
This elephant?
No, definitely not that elephant. No one's supposed to have seen that. No, this elephant. Yep, after buggering around with a bump steer, the track rod end is now hard up against the inside of the tyre. We've got to figure out a way of moving the track rod inboard.
We're going to do it by taking out this straight riser and replacing it with an offset one.
Here's an offset one we quickly mocked up and dropped it loosely in the hole, and we'll set it up at 90 degrees to the drive flange, so in theory it won't affect the steering ratio.
Now we've moved that pivot point inboards, the Gen 7 Selector steering arm we were using is now way too long. So I've gone back to the original steering arm and cut it and shortened it quite a bit.
Cut it, shortened it about 60mm and sleeved it, although this is only temporary until we can find some time to rummage through the Toyota parts catalogue to find something that'll do the job better than this.
Of course, now we've changed all that, the tedious setup work we've already done is completely irrelevant, so we're going to have to start all over again. Luckily, bump steer settings is one of my favourite things. Oh no, sorry, that's lasagna I'm thinking of. Bugger. Yep, the steering arm hits the chassis before we get to full bump. I don't think we'll ever get to full bump with the spring on, but frankly, I don't want to take that chance. And that leaves us with one option.
We've got to re-engineer one of the bits we've already re-engineered once already. See, we aren't infallible, far from it. We're just winging this thing from start to finish. Now to quickly whip up a strip to close in the hole we've just created by cutting out that section that's now abandoned and lonely on the workshop floor. We'll just tack it in for now, pending further alteration, and we'd like to keep 50mm depth along the top edge, so the addition of this 25mm piece of box section will do exactly that.
It's not all bad news. Now the steering arm's running all the way up here, there's enough room between it and where the drive shaft runs to put a brace here. And that'll make this whole area stronger than it was before I cut a chunk out of it.
So while Nick cracks on with that, I'm gonna get the funk out.
With that little distraction over, it's back to the seemingly Sisyphean task of sorting the steering geometry. It's probably worth mentioning at this point, now we've shortened the steering arm that much, we're never going to get zero bump steer throughout the whole suspension travel.
We really don't need to see this again, it's tedious. Instead, I'll show you around a few other problems that we're going to have to solve in the near future. This meaty looking brace ties the two bottom arms in together, and stiffens the front end up. We must have done something right because all 6 holes line up perfectly. Trouble is, we can't use it, as we've moved the engine so far back that it's now in the way. Bolted to this hole is another enormous member that runs longitudinally under the engine. Mounted to it are 2 torque reaction bushes, and the front one picks up on a bracket bolted to the bell housing here. You can now get a better idea of how little room we had to work with, as the 2 holes in the front of this longitudinal brace mounted here on the selector and bolted to that lower cross member. And this is still about 400mm short of the front bumper. We'll have to come up with something to replicate these 2 braces later on, but for now, we better head back and see how Nick's getting on with the bump steer. Well, where the bloody hell is he? Oi, Blackhurst, have you sorted the bump steer yet?
Yes?
Okay. Have you figured out a way of attaching the steering arm to the hub?
Yes?
Well, chop chop, get on with it. We haven't got all bloody episode. In the end, we figured we'd just mount the steering arms directly to the struts using these brackets. We made the brackets in the time-honoured tradition. First, cut out the steel on the bandsaw. Then, drill out some holes with the step drill. Then use the bender to form the returns. And you end up with something like this. The next job is to turn up some meaty spacer bushes and then weld them into position on the plates. Then it's simply a case of welding all the way down both sides to join the two halves together permanently. After a quick linish off, they look like this once they're finished.
So, all I need to do now then is attach this to the strut in the right place and then exactly replicate it but in mirror image on the other strut. And I'm hoping, with the help of this and this, it can't possibly go wrong.
The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley. But anyway, enough of Rabbi Burns and his rodents. We move on to fixing the bracket to the strut. And I hope he's only going to tack it on because there's a pressurised gas cylinder in the strut that, should it explode, would make his hair even more of a mess than it already is. Excellent. Certain eyebrow singeing avoided. For disassembly, you just need the assistance of a slight adjuster.
That was the easy bit. How do we sort the mirror image? Well, you've probably spotted I've already got the hub square, level and bolted down to a girder. I've also made sure that the camber adjusters are the same and that the struts are at the same angle, and we've got a piece of all thread holding the wheel bearing together so the drive flange is square to the hub. With all this set up like this should in theory make it all sort itself out. So, we'll start with the original mock-up riser. This has got a taper that sits in the original track rod end taper, like this, and this should give us our distance back. Combine that with the same track rod end and spacer, that should give us our height. The arm we're using, exactly the same as the other side, and this is the same bit of flat metal with the same holes in it, and that should give us our distance away from the strut. So in theory, that point there should be an exact mirror image of the one we've got on the other side. And as a check, this piece of box should be at 90 degrees to this tracking bar because that's how it was set up on the other side.
Better just test that theory.
Nice. Sometimes these things do actually work. I've just got to bolt it up and weld it.
So there you have it. The two brackets are welded on, although I'm unsure as to how we bolt the track rods to them.
You don't. For that, you need this lot.
God, here we go again. Another overly complicated solution to a relatively simple problem. Nothing's ever easy with Nick. Well, apart from Nick himself, obviously.
Why have we ended up with this, on the face of it at least, overly complicated solution to the steering arms? Well, this is episode 11, so you should know the answer to that already if you've been paying attention. And it's not just because that's what we do, far from it. It's all about future-proofing and ease of adjustability again. Now, as we've got this set up, it's at our working ride height, we've got parallel front tracking, and we've got our starting point of 1 degree negative camber. Now that's fine. When we get out on the road and start testing it, we may need to change one, if not all of these things. Every one of them will have an effect on the steering geometry. What we've got there is a bolt-on solution should we need to move the track rod end up, down, inwards, outwards, whatever we need to do. For now though, I think we'll just worry about what bump steer characteristics have we ended up with now it's all together.
Time to fire up the frickin' laser beam and check this thing out. From full bump through our intended ride height, there's nigh on zero deflection. It's not until we get to the last 30 mm of droop that the wheel begins to toe out a total of 75 mm at the back wall.
That information on its own is pretty much useless, but we know it's 4.4 metres exactly from the back wall to the centre line of this hub. Now if we use those two measurements as two sides of a right angle triangle, and we use a bit of basic schoolboy maths, which if I'm honest I had to look up again because it's been a long time since I was a schoolboy, and we can work out that that 75 mm at the wall equates to just under a degree of turn here at the hub. Now if you consider what's gone on and how much we've changed, I'm pretty sure that less than 1 degree of maximum bump steer, and let's be honest, it's right at the bottom of the travel where the tyre would be unloaded anyway, well I'm calling that a result.
So by the power of PowerPoint, here's that schoolboy maths for you. And when the formula is solved, we end up with less than a degree of deflection. Got to be happy with that.
Right, honestly, that is it for solding bump steer. So if you're still watching, well done, you've made it through. And the only reason we've dedicated so much time to it is bump steer is the one thing in a car that can make it anything from unpredictable to downright dangerous, so it was worth spending some time on. And there's a lot of other stuff going on with the front geometry. We're not going to bore you with most of it, but a lot of people seem to have shown an interest in Ackermann. So if you want to know all about Ackermann geometry, look it up online. But for now, what we need to know is this.
So true Ackermann is when a line taken from the centre line of the wheels, on lock, intersects at a point that's in line with the rear axle. Now most cars don't have true Ackermann, but we're especially compromised because we've shortened the wheelbase and we've moved the track rod end inboard a long way.
We did want an intellectual to do that piece for you, but we soon realised we don't actually know any. So I'm afraid Rich in a pair of spectacles is as highbrow as you're going to get. Anyway, Ackermann geometry. How's the car set up for it? No idea. Let's measure it and find out.
Yeah, that's the best place for you, Blackhurst, on your knees after that last remark. The closest thing you get to highbrow is the occasional addition of an olive on your meat feast pizza. And I know for a fact your televisual titillation is slow-mo reruns of the opening credits to Baywatch on a loop. So anyway, we've marked out the dead straight ahead position. But how much lock do we need to add in order to measure the Ackermann in normal driving conditions?
We're not really interested in what happens at full lock. Worst case scenario there is we might get a bit of low speed tyre scrub whilst manoeuvring. What we need to know is what happens under normal driving conditions. So, for the past couple of weeks, purely in the interests of science, I've been thrashing around Shropshire trying to find out what normal driving conditions actually are around here. And what I found out is this. 99% of the time, even around Shropshire, you never use more than 90 degrees steering wheel input. I know it's all relative to the car you drive, but in mine, that equates to less than 5 degrees steering angle at the wheel. Now that's day-to-day driving, roundabouts and such. When you get up to speed on the twisties, unless of course your name's Chris Harris, you don't use half of that.
By the way, this is what scientific research does to your tyres. Right, so we've arbitrarily decided to measure the Ackermann at 90 degrees, 180 degrees and 360 degrees of right turn steering input, which equates to 11, 22 and 44 mil of steering rack travel respectively. Using the plumb lines to mark the paper, we join the dots to mark the line and then measure the resultant angle. And at 90 degrees input, the right side wheel is showing 5.5 degrees. Doing the same at 180 degrees input, and it's 11.5 degrees. The 360 degree input measured 25.8 degrees. But what will they be like on the left-hand side of the car?
I haven't actually measured these angles yet, but for us to have any Ackermann geometry at all, the angles measured on this side for the same steering wheel input need to be less than they were on the other side, this being the outside wheel and therefore needing to describe a larger arc.
The angles on the left side are 5.1 degrees, 10.5 degrees and 20.7 degrees, which is gravy. The next question is, do we have more Ackermann or less Ackermann angle? Well, in other words, is the point of intersection in front or behind the centre line of the rear axle? Well, there's only one way to find out.
I need a shark and some cable ties.
No, you don't. You need some masking tape, a pen, a laser, some steel box section, a hat, some knee pads, a small painted wooden duck, and a whole lot of patience. Look, long story short, this has already been as dull as ditch water. We measured it. It took ages, but we drew some important conclusions. For more on what all this means, it's over to our chief Ackermann correspondent, Nick Blackhurst.
So what does it all mean? Well, for me at least, it means a lot of time on my knees getting tape off the floor. But for the car, it means it'll work. Or at least it won't do anything stupid. We've got Ackermann throughout the entire steering range. That means the inner wheel is always turning more than the outer wheel, which is what we needed. The bit we're really interested in, that initial 90 degrees of steering wheel input, we've got a centerline turn radius in front of the rear axle, and that should make it want to turn in nicely, which is good, because I really don't like understeer.
Well, that's it for steering. Thank God for that. It's taken way too long, but it's important stuff. It's no good having a car that handles like a pig on stilts, so we took our time. Just checking that nothing fouls any part of the car through all the suspension and steering movement, and then it's on to the rest of the controls.
Hold that thought. With a lot of research and a bit of help, I found some steering arms.
Ooh, lovely. Here's the original Selector arm with about 20mm lopped off it. Here's a Gen 7 Selector arm. Here's the bodge job we shortened and sleeved earlier on. And this is off a 97 to 99 Toyota Carina E, estate only, 1.8 and 2 litre petrol only, and only if fitted with a ZF steering rack. You gotta love the internet.
While I was changing those steering arms, I've taken the opportunity to put these lock reducers in. Now, they're there purely to try and extend the life of the outer CV joints. They're only 20mm, and I don't think we're going to miss it. If we need that 20mm at the end of lock at speed, I think we were already a passenger and it won't make any difference. As for manoeuvring, well, that's what the limited slip diff in the back is for. So, that really is it for steering, and now it's on to the rest of the controls. But before I can look at those, we need to fit the passenger seat.
Here's the driver's side mounts we fitted a couple of episodes ago. And the passenger side is exactly the same, only a mirror image. So we can go from this to this in the blink of an eye.
Why doesn't that ever happen in real life?
Because contrary to popular belief, you're not actually a wizard. More of a rincewind than a Gandalf. But anyway, here's me making a massive meal of fitting 2 seats inside a Mini. It's much easier than it looks.
You're a pinball wizard. That is my sense of smell. This is kind of how this is working.
It'd be rude not to try them for size. The Honda seats and their position has meant that we've kind of turned this 4-seat Mini into something more like a 2+2. That's 2 people plus 2 amoeba. We have steering and we have pedals, so logically, gear selection is next. The old Mini arrangement ain't gonna work, so we'll reuse the original Selector cable setup.
This twin cable setup is pretty typical of nearly all transverse engine cars, certainly of recent times, and it's really simple. One cable takes care of your forward and backwards movement of your stick, and the other takes care of the side to side via a little pivot lever arm arrangement. Now, having said it's fairly simple, it's very cleverly designed to work just the way it is. If we can get away with using it all unmodified, it'll save us a great deal of ball ache. So, we'll start with a stick. It is quite bulky, so I suppose the first job is to make sure it actually fits the top of the tunnel.
Let's offer it up and see where we stand. And it's almost as if the tunnel was made the right width to accept the gear lever assembly.
I can't finalise the position of this yet because I've no idea where the gear stick rests in neutral relative to the gate. To find that out, I need to connect the other end of the cables to the gearbox, and to do that, I need to make a hole.
It's actually a series of holes followed by copious use of the grinder. It's not just any hole either, it's designed specifically to accept the rubber sealed cover plate off the Selector. Welded to the underside of the hole is this 2mm thick reinforcer with the ubiquitous captive nuts. After passing the cables through the newly formed hole, the easy bit is to hook them up to the gear linkage on the box. Except that half of it's missing.
Actually, there's 2/3 missing, namely the cable bracket and the crossgate lever. And they should bolt on something like this. And the 2 cables come through the holes in the cable bracket here and operate the gears thus. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and reverse. I know what you're thinking. Surely they're quite important to the normal operation of this gearbox. Well, you'd be right, and don't call me Shirley. So why were they missing? Well, simple version is, we can't use them because some bell end put a steering rack in the way. And if we magic the engine and box back in the hole for a minute, we'll show you what the problems are.
So with the cable bracket loosely mounted, it's hard up against the steering rack, and we're some distance away from bolting the gearbox up. So get rid of the cable bracket, and it's the crossgate lever that fouls, and we're still miles away. Take away both items, and we're golden. Unless, of course, you're on full left hand down in full droop in second gear, or you want to use that rearmost bolt hole. Apart from that, we're golden.
Some modifications required then, and they'll have to be cock on because there's no adjustment in the standard cables. So where to start? This one.
This is how the cable is meant to attach to the lever in its standard form. Of course, we can't use that, so I fear a coming together with the grinder is imminent. On most gearboxes, gaining access to the main selector mechanism is tricky to say the least, but on the Toyota it's simply a case of removing the detent and undoing 4 bolts. Even Nick can manage that. With the mechanism on the bench, we can get a closer look at what we're working with before attacking it with various power tools. First the pillar drill, then the grinder, and finally the sander. It all seems pretty straightforward so far. Attached to the modified mechanism will be this new arm, which gets fully welded round and then painted a pretty shade of gloss black. Beautiful. But we're not finished yet. We need something to bolt the cable end to. So with some more drilling, milling, jiggery-pokery, grinding, welding and painting, we end up with this arm that should do the trick just nicely. Now it's simply a case of bolting the whole thing back on the gearbox and see how it all looks. This new arm is made up of 3 pieces, the 2 we've just made and the spacer in the middle.
I'm sure you're way ahead on this one already, but as I remember it, the selector had quite a long throw at the gear stick. What these slots allow us to do is reduce the length of this arm, which effectively reduces the length of throw required at the gear stick to get in and out of gear. The spacer is just there to give us a bit of wiggle room fore and aft should we need it. So that's that one taken care of. It's onto the crossgate lever. It's going to be much the same thing, but before we can start we need to work out how high it needs to be to clear the steering rack.
With the engine and box back in place and with the suspension raised to working height, you can see that the clearance on the rack gaiter is now absolutely fine. But how high do we need to raise the crossgate lever? Well, through the use of a rule, a straight edge and various bits of random offcuts, we worked out we need a 75mm of uplift. So how do we go about adding 75mm to this lever? Well, first thing, hack it in half with a grinder. Then take a piece of box section and lop off the corner. Cut a V-shape into it with the grinder and then bend it through 90 degrees. Weld the gap up and linish it off before MIGging it to the original lever. A quick spray over with some attractive silver paint and the reconstruction is complete. With it bolted back on the box, there's now plenty of clearance above the rack.
That'll work fine, but it does still leave us with a small problem. If I make the extension piece to go on here the same as the other one, straight, it puts the cable on the same alignment that it was before, just higher up. And that unfortunately means that the cable bracket wants to interfere with the steering rack mount. So the bit we make for here not only has to incorporate some fore and aft adjustment so we can alter the throw on the gear stick, we also got to allow us to change the trajectory of the gear cable so it doesn't hit the steering rack mount.
After whipping out my set of coloured crayons again, and the mill, the brand new arm looks pretty darn good.
The last job in here is to modify the cable bracket, although I'm thinking it might actually be easier to start from scratch.
So start from scratch we will. A quick CAD template for the base plate, then finished in 2mm steel. That's the easy bit. We can't use the third bolt hole due to clearance issues, so we'll pick up off that bolt on the side of the gearbox. Work out the relationship between the new base plate and the centre line of that bolt hole. Plus, we've also got to clear the hump in the aluminium casting in order to get the bracket to that bolt. You might have spied a clean piece of 160 by 160mm cardboard just now, and that will form the bulk of this template. So, after marking it out, punching a hole in it, and scoring it to give it a bend, we just offer it up to make sure we're on the right track. Relieving the bottom of it will give us the clearance we need for the hump, and we'll take a peek down the side to check for clearance to the rack. Next thing to think about is offsetting the bracket to go round that bolt head, else we can't get a socket on it. So with a bit more bending, the step now clears the bolt head and there's plenty of room to get a big ass spanner on it. The end of the upstand falls nicely in between the 2 bolt heads, so there's plenty of room to weld it. With the cables back on, you can see there's quite a bit of the bracket unused, so we've trimmed back the superfluous portions. Now that the template is finished in 2mm steel, it's time to tack it to the base plate. Lovely. So now we've got something to work from, the next part is to replicate these holes that actually hold the cable outers. Here's the templates for them. The bottom one goes on here like this, and the top one goes on here like this. A soupçon of grinding and drilling later, we can check that the hole sizes are correct, and then bend up the returns to end up with these 2 brackets that are ready to tack onto the main support. That all looks good, so after a little fettling, we've ended up with a finished bracket welded round, linished back, primed and sprayed a striking shade of silver. Gorgeous. So there it is. The gear selector cable support is finished and bolted to the gearbox.
Now we've got the cables in place, we can get back to the original job, which was trying to mount the gear stick.
These 2 risers bolt to the underside of the stick carriage to raise the gear knob to about the same height as the Mini.
Straight away we've hit a bit of a snag. I can't get the gear stick far forward enough because the cable bracket hits the rise in the tunnel. I can't cut a chunk out of the tunnel because of the anti-roll bar. We've also got a bent gear stick, which isn't helping. Now I could cut that off and re-weld on a straight one. Trying to avoid that if possible, because in my experience welded sticks have a habit of breaking. So at the moment I've got a third, more usual solution to try first.
Yep, you guessed it, his more usual solution involves the grinder to cut out a couple of V-shapes in the bracket. Bend it up to clear the tunnel, and then tack it in pending any further modifications. Now that's done, it's time to test the gear selector assembly to see if it actually works. And the good news is yes it does. Excellent.
Well, it works, and I think it works well enough to at least give it a try on the road. So I think that means we're done with the gear change, and we're on to the handbrake.
Now we could go for a hydraulic fly-off handbrake like the one in the rally car, but we can't be arsed, so the standard Toyota one it is. The position of the handbrake is dictated largely by the prop shaft centre bearing support, so we've got very little wiggle room about its placement. However, with the seats back in, the result is pretty good, so we're happy with that.
I may have lied about the steering being finished.
Ah yes, I think we'll need the steering lock and the ignition barrel, as they form an important part of the whole starting the engine and vehicular security deal.
So the controls all sorted, I can't help myself, I'm going to have to make the brum brum noises.
Hey! Thought we said we weren't doing that. Give me the keys. Give me the keys. Give me the keys.
Killjoy.
Well, as he rudely curtailed my fun, we'll end the episode right there. So, tune in next time to hear Nick say,
It's in my raccoon wound!
be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode from the files of Project Binky.
Once.